hi to everyone joining. We'll just give you a few minutes to kind of get everyone, as Liam says, in from the waiting room into the actual meeting. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. You will have noticed that I'm definitely not Liam Mullins, but I am hosting the panel today. Yeah, obviously Liam is looks quite different, but he decided to take a bit of a break, probably school holidays and all of that, and he's passed over the responsibility to me, which I'm very much looking forward to. Hopefully, my panelists will be well behaved, but sometimes it's more interesting if they're not. So we'll see what happens in the next 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, cool. Let's get started. So yeah, I'm not Liam Mullins. I'm here, Harry Ashar. I'm the head of broadcast at a startup agency called Anything Is Possible. And I am hosting the panel today because today's panel is in celebration and to mark South Asian Heritage Month. South Asian Heritage Month runs from the 18th of July to 17th of August every year, and it seeks to raise the profile of British South Asian heritage and history in the UK through education, arts, culture, and commemoration, with the goal of helping people better understand the diversity of present-day Britain and improve social cohesion across the country. Its inaugural year was last year in 2020. So obviously last year everything was virtual celebrations. This year predominantly virtual celebrations, but hopefully we'll move forward to a stage where we can celebrate these sorts of things in person. Obviously, this is MEFA Matters. MEFA, as I'm sure many of you are aware by now, was an organisation set up in 2018 by Narendra Patel, the founder of MEFA, and it was set up with the ambition of helping Black, Asian, and ethnic minority talent to really thrive in the media industry. Before I go on to my amazing panel that I have got here today for you, just wanted to remind you all that this is a safe space. We want to tackle difficult themes, but as I say, it's a safe space. But if you are triggered or you have any concerns about anything that's been discussed, then please get in touch with NABS, who are always available for support 24/7. I'll post the details in the chat shortly if you want to get in touch with them. So, as I say, I have an amazing panel of Asian talent to celebrate South Asian Heritage Month. And before we dive into the panel, I know Liam does introductions normally, but we're going to do something a little bit different this time around. Because the term Asian is such a broad term, I want to kind of explore, obviously, what everybody does in terms of their day-to-day roles, but a little bit about their background. So I'll use myself as an example. I am a British-born Indian. I was born and raised in this country. I've lived here my whole life. My parents were actually both born in East Africa in Kenya, and my dad moved over here when he was less than 1 year old, so he was really, really young, and my mum when she was about 10 years old. So my family has been based in the UK and in northwest London for pretty much the last 60 years. I'm going to let the panel do the same thing and introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass over to Ships first, and then Ships, I'll let you hand the baton over to whoever you want to go next.
Hey everyone, and thanks Mihir. So I'm Shripriya Devprakash. You have probably heard from me quite a few times. So I'm at Forward PMX. I am born and bred in North London in the UK. However, my parents originate from Bangladesh. For those of you that are familiar with the history of Bangladesh, will also probably know that they weren't born in Bangladesh, actually. They were born in British India. And then subsequently lived in East Pakistan for a while, and then moved over to the UK after Bangladesh was liberated 50 years ago. So we're celebrating independence of Bangladesh this year. And it's taken me 40 odd years to actually understand that and actually understand the history of our family. And incidentally, my parents, my mother and my father's family homes never moved. So although they've lived in essentially 3 or 4 different countries, it wasn't until they came to the UK that they actually moved houses. So that's, that I think is an interesting fact. I'm going to hand over to Vino, who's over to my left.
Thank you. I'm Vino. I work at Pink News, which is the world's biggest LGBT plus news organisation, but I do have a background in advertising as well. I am a journalist by trade, and I used to be the editor-in-chief at Iris, which is how I got involved in MEFA, but now I'm back in news. I am of Sri Lankan descent. My parents both Tamil. My dad moved to London when he was 21 in 1960, and my mum was 17, and she moved the following year, and they met in London and had a great 60s romance in Chelsea and lived together for 7 years before getting married and did all kinds of crazy things. I was born in Tooting sometime in the 70s, let's not go into details. And I was raised in Tooting and Surrey, went to sort of quite a posh all girls grammar school, which was very white. So I definitely stood out there. And then spent my life working as a journalist. I've been working as a journalist for 25 years in news organisations, websites, and now an LGBT organisation. So I definitely identify as being an outsider in every sense of the word. And I will hand over to my great friend Shez, who's a partner in every way.
Thanks, Vina. I really feel that. So I'm Shez Iqbal. I've worked in the industry for around 16 odd years. Currently, I work at Criteo as the Director of Publisher Partnerships, looking after Northern Europe in particular. Previous to this, I was at other ad tech organizations, including Outbrain or Live Intent or Sublime, and also some publisher companies like News UK and The Guardian. My background is a little bit obscure. So I was born and raised in the UK. My mother's side actually originates from Kutch, India, and they moved to Pakistan during partition. My father's side are from Bangladesh, or Cyprus said, well, yeah, that was Pakistan as well. Both of my parents came over here when they were very young to study. When growing up, I received some animosity towards my heritage because there weren't really many Bangladeshis and Pakistanis hooking up and getting married and so on and so forth. So yeah, that was a bit like Vino, really. You didn't really know which camp you sat in, and then went to a school that was predominantly white as well. So if you're talking about fitting in, yeah, that was certainly a little bit more difficult. I really loved it when I saw the British Asian box start popping up in all the all the polls and what have you, because that's just easy. That means that I can be vague enough to still honour my heritage without being rude to one side or the other. So yeah, I call myself British Asian, born and raised South Londoner, and families from Pakistan and Bangladesh. And I will hand over to Rak.
Thanks, Shez. Mihir, I think you're already doing a better job than Liam, to be quite honest, but thank you for the invite as well. So I'm Rak, I work at Spotify. I've been in the media industry for 20 plus years or so. I, like Mihir, Gujarati background. My parents actually met in Kenya. My mum was born in Kenya. My dad was born in Gujarat in India. They met in Nairobi, and in the early 70s came over to the UK. You may be able to pick up a slight northern accent. When I'm with Mancunians, it goes a lot stronger. I was born and bred in Manchester. No Indian community really there when I grew up. So I actually grew up in a very Jewish area. Then went to a very white school and did geography at university. I know, for an Asian, crazy. So did that, then fell into media, and I've been in media since. Know quite a lot of the people on this panel as well, either have worked with or have been out on various events and so on over the space of the last 20 years, which is so lovely to be on this panel. Yeah, at Spotify, I lead the sales across EMEA, and before that, I was at Auto Trader, Microsoft, EMAP, and the Financial Times. And lovely to be here. I'll pass it to Kat.
Thanks, Rak. So I am Kat Bezicevic, which is, for a start, always surprising for a panel where we're discussing mainly Asian matters. I'm the MD, I'll come on to it a bit later, but I'm the MD of a media planning and buying agency called Manning Gottlieb OMD, or MGOMD. That was a difficult email to deal with for a bit. And I am here and I'm sure some of you have already noticed that I'm here representing, to celebrate obviously the South Asian Heritage Month, we're representing the East Asian contingent. So my background is I was born in the Philippines, and I was adopted from an orphanage there at 4 months old by first generation Americans, and their parents came from Croatia. And then we sort of poodled around East Asia for a bit, and I landed in the UK by 3. So I've firmly been here since then, predominantly, and I think this is a theme, sort of growing up in predominantly white surroundings, in a white dominated school. And I guess to Shez's point about ONS's thoughtfully worded categorizations of us, I'm a proud ticker of the Asian other box. So I'm literally othering myself at every possible opportunity. And it is a bit galling, you know, if you think about our backgrounds and the kind of the wealth of populations that exist in our countries of origin. There's 100 million Filipinos, you know, that's bigger than the UK, but sort of ticking an Asian other box where I am is an interesting experience every time. And then the other thing, just to point out, I guess, because it will probably sort of put a lens on some of the things I say in this panel, is that I was raised with a very transatlantic view of Asians. You know, in America, the term Asian predominantly refers to East Asians. You know, they're 6% Asian in their overall population, but nearly half of that is Chinese and Filipino. Here, the number of Filipinos, you know, the Asian number is, you know, 7.5. It drops to less than 0.3% in the UK. So from a major minority to one that really barely exists here. And so that's quite an interesting sort of dynamic to navigate as we talk about what being Asian really means to us. So, and then I will pass to last but absolutely not least, Rivleen.
Thank you, Kat, and also really pleased to be here. So interesting hearing everybody's backgrounds, and like Rack said, I've known some of the people here for quite a long time, and it's the first time actually I'm hearing so much detail about their backgrounds. So I'm Ravleen Beeston. I work at Microsoft in the UK. Also been in the industry for about 18 years. I'm a British-born Punjabi. My parents were actually born in Iran, where there was a very thriving Punjabi community before the 60s and 70s, at which point they relocated pretty much en masse either to India, mainly northern India, or then to the UK here. My parents, actually their dads were best friends, and they were both the shortest in their families. And so the dads decided that they should marry them off because they couldn't possibly find anybody else as short as they both were. So that's how they got married. They moved here, settled in a little town in Gravesend in Kent, where in fact there was again a very thriving Punjabi community. So it was really interesting because I grew up almost feeling like I was growing up in a little India, and went to a primary school that was, I think we had 2 white people in the entire school. Flipped from that, at secondary school, I made it into a grammar school, and so went completely the other way and was pretty much the only Indian in my school, which was a really disparate change for me, and came with its own stigma because I kind of got a little bit ostracized from my old primary school friends for becoming what they would call too white. And I never really, I mean, I had amazing friends at the school that I went to, but I still felt other there. And so it was a really interesting dynamic, to the point that when I was going to university, I said to my mom, I just want to go somewhere where there's more Indian people. Like, I don't want to, I'm sick of telling people why I can't come out to the pub on Friday night. So like, I just want to be somewhere. And I ended up going to King's on the Medic campus, very specifically. I didn't study medicine, but I chose to be on that campus and switched completely the other way around again. So just had this really interesting experience of being around different cultures. And then it's a very live discussion in my house because, you know, I come from an Orthodox Sikh family. You know, all the men in my family have turbans, beards. I have very long hair, even though it doesn't look like it from the front. I married a white man, and so it's a constant conversation in our house, you know, culture, bringing up mixed race children, what does that look like, talking about racism with, you know, it's always a live discussion. So this is very, very interesting to have this discussion. He's also in the industry, so yeah.
Amazing. I mean, just from hearing everyone's stories, we already have such kind of diverse background, which is going to shape a lot of what we talk about for the rest of the panel. But it just goes to show that Asian as a term is so broad, and there's so many complexities within that. And even when we go down to South Asian, there's so many differences, and East Asian, there's just, it doesn't, putting that generalization on people doesn't really kind of tell the whole story. But anyway, as we move on, so I want to kind of bring this back to the advertising world. And there's obviously, at the beginning of this year, I think it was in March, there was a national census, and also Adlan did our own census, where the All-In survey. Now, there was a lot of shocking findings from the All-In survey, which have kind of gone out to the industry, and some of them were shocking but unsurprising. But I think some of the statistics around Asians were really kind of stopped a lot of us on our tracks, because whilst we may have been aware there was some difficulty, some of the numbers were quite bad. So, for example, 15% of Asians reported that they had experienced discrimination in the time that they'd been in the industry, and 27% of them were likely to leave because they believe there was a lack of inclusion for people like them. Now, these are pretty big numbers. I know that the percentages don't seem big, but they really are, and it should be far less than that. Well, it should be nothing really, but it should be far less than that. And is this something that we've been aware of, or is it something that has been completely missed by the industry? Have we been focusing on other things? Is it something that you've experienced in kind of your career? So, Shez, I'm going to come to you first on this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on those stats, and if you are surprised by them or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I'd say that, of course, I agree that it's a harrowing statistic, and I urge everyone to read the All-In report. So I don't want to share too many stats. I was going to bring out a whole bunch of stats, but actually I just want to direct everyone to the report, because I think it's a report they should read. But South Asians in particular in the report reported to feel less than belonging than their white colleagues, right? And that they also saw people like themselves progressing up the ladder far less in leadership roles and just in general. So moving up the ladder. And the fact is that the issues pertaining to South Asians in the workplace were not considered. So if you think about the recent changes in our industry surrounding, say, gender or sexuality or black people in the workplace, those issues were better understood because of the coming together of individuals to speak from one common voice. And Asian people haven't traditionally come together with a singular voice to air their concerns or opinions. So, for example, if Ravleen's Sikh and I'm Muslim, perhaps there might be something there where we wouldn't come together. But actually, we're South Asian. We should come together, and we should have one voice. So whilst the blame doesn't solely lie with us, right? The fact that we don't have we haven't come together and we don't have this singular voice, I think that's something that needs to be considered. That we do need to come together, and reports and initiatives like the All-In survey, like talks like this, help us and support us in moving forward in the right direction. So that's my first point. Secondly, I'd say when an organization is looking at diversity levels on paper, they're probably seeing a fair number of South Asians on the payroll, but the work hasn't been done to work out which department those individuals are prominent in or what levels of seniority they're in. And again, that's something that needs to be considered. And reports like the All-In survey or again these sort of conversations hopefully will push the industry and push employees to look into that in a little bit more detail. I think that's what needs to be done first.
Awesome, thank you, Shez. I think the singular voice point is a really important point, and actually that leads me perfectly onto the next person I wanted to ask this question to, which is Kat, because maybe the one time that we've seen the singular voice amongst the Asian community was earlier this year, because of tragic circumstances and because of the misinformation around COVID and all those sorts of things. We saw the industry get behind, or some of the industry get behind, Stop Asian Hate. Do you think that happens more often? Do you think it needs to happen more often? Has it happened enough previously?
Yes, and I think the Stop Asian Hate was a real moment, and I tried to. It really sort of it triggered me, and I remember being on the WhatsApp group as well for MEFA, and all the outpouring of support and the kind of dialogue around it was very motivating. We ended up actually putting a panel on in Omnicom because of that, because we wanted to sort of share the Asian experience more broadly and more loudly, because it was one of the type, I think, the type of trigger for that kind of an experience was just so much more common to how people perceive active racism. So I think that there is no single voice observation. I think what that does for me, there's a concept called the invisible Asian, and you see it, and it's just inherent bias in the way that statistics are presented. They pull out X group, Y group, never pull out Asian, and I think, and again, this is leaning slightly again on the American experience here, but they talk about the Asian community as a model minority, right? Like it's the minority that is seen to be well integrated, seem to be getting along just fine, and actually recently there have been a few articles exploring whether that's valid in the UK, and I think it is, and that model minority, the type of discrimination they see, it's much more around microaggressions and structural issues. So it's not physical, it's not really racism, there's no active segregation, but what we're dealing with is sort of assumptions of competencies, or you're Asian, you're probably really good at maths, or and equally structurally, religion-based exclusion in our industry can be a problem, because like Roblin says, how many times can we say not really going to go down the pub tonight. So I think that where Stop Asian Hate became a real moment in time for us to kind of put our heads above the parapet was because it was a physical, active demonstration of racism against our community, and as such, it was different enough for us to be able to say, here's a lighthouse, and then here are all the other things we're experiencing. And I think a single voice underneath that would be quite powerful to drive, awareness of some of those unthinking. And that, having grown up in a predominantly white background, I also have been, unconsciously exclusive of people. Even a guy I used to work with who was Taiwanese. In his background, and his nature and his culture is much more introverted, and I always used to worry about bringing him into meetings with me because I thought, oh, he's not going to talk enough, the clients aren't going to really feel like he's present, and that's very that's not inclusive behavior, and it is inherent to our industry. So I think grabbing those moments in time, rallying around as a community, and doing our best to draw it back to those daily microaggressions so that people see them clearly and can address them is really valuable.
That's great, and that's really kind of valuable insight that you've given us there. And I kind of want to continue along that theme and ask, we obviously talked about upfront at the start of the panel how there are huge cultural differences between Asians and how kind of problematic the broad term of Asians could be. And these cultural differences come down to things like the geographies, religion, which we've touched on very briefly, heritage, movement of families, and also and due to kind of the imperial times and how families were kind of moved all over in search of what they believed was better opportunities. Do you feel that some of the problems that we have are not self-inflicted because these circumstances were kind of put upon us, but there is a lot of inter-Asian racism? So in the East Asian culture, I'm asking you for your expertise here, Kat, do you feel that there's sometimes kind of racism between different parts of East Asian culture, and is that holding us back?
Oh, for sure. There are sort of sibling dynamics everywhere, and I'm using that term really sort of intentionally because we are all still sisters and brothers in the same, in the face of the similar adversity. I know that, for example, the Japanese and Korean communities have struggled traditionally to find a common ground, and I haven't got my head around all of the dynamics that exist between South Asian countries, and so I think that's an area where I'd love to know more about the kind of the differences, the historical context. I think and to take it even further, Naren sort of said, sometimes I wonder whether we might be racist against each other, and I think that could well be the case. I've only once experienced racism from what I would consider to be my own people, which was when I was visiting Thailand, and I was with my white boyfriend at the time and a couple of white friends, and genuinely they treated me as though I was a sort of a sex worker from Thailand, So it was just the most bizarre experience. They wouldn't put my food down in front of me. They would give it to my boyfriend and he would have to pass it to me. And it is profoundly disturbing when you sort of have that kind of experience. So I think absolutely that's an extreme example. But it does translate into, and also one of the conversations I've had in my mentoring is somebody I work with has said it's really hard to look at people when you're working 2 times, 5 times, 10 times as hard as everybody else to kind of get to where you want to get to. People who are coming from the same background and who you feel might be letting the side down, and to let go of that judgment. And so there's a lot of complexity to it. And I think it does stop us from coming together. And I think that the challenge for us will be to think about how will we recognize and celebrate all of those small and big parts of difference that leverage a single voice. So in our all-in work, we've spent a couple of times discussing, can storytelling become part of that solution? I learn from people. I think a lot of people in this industry do, and all of, I think someone would put it in the chat, like all of those introductions, those stories are just an endless well of inspiration. So I think part of the solution is to be standalone, and celebrate our differences, but and to surface those individual stories, but as part of a compelling whole. And I think we need to find that compelling overarching narrative as well. That's the bit that might be missing.
Absolutely, and I agree. Vino's just put in the chat as well that storytelling is key to understand people's kind of cultural backgrounds. Ships, I'm going to come to you on this as well for kind of the South Asian perspective. Now, often I talk amongst friends and say that actually I feel that Asians are, South Asians, particularly Indians, are the most racist people that I know. And it comes down to things like, things I may not consider to be racist, but there's a lot of colorism in our culture. There's things like, if a girl was getting married, so they're told by their family not to spend too much time in the sun because I'll be too dark and things like that. I just want to ask, in terms of the industry, have you ever kind of experienced it, or do you see that it exists, that there's inter-Asian competitiveness which may borderline on kind of racism between different cultures?
I think in terms of from an industry perspective, I haven't worked with many Asians directly, right? So it'd be difficult for me to say that there is definitely a direct competitiveness between colleagues and stuff, because I haven't had the fortunate circumstances to actually have worked with many Asians who could be competing. But if I draw back from my own experiences, yes, there is definitely racism within the Southeast Asian community. And in fact, as soon as we started talking about it, I remember an article I read just yesterday, I think it was, and it was Mirabai Chanu won the silver medal in the Olympics, and Ankita Komar, who is married to Milind Soman, kind of came out with, well, you're now accepting her, but previously she would have been known as a Chinky, or as because she's Nepalese. So I think there is a lot of racism within the Southeast Asian community as a whole, and it comes from the social constructs that we and our families have grown up with. And unfortunately, they tend to seep in unconsciously a lot of the times. So I would introduce myself as Bangladeshi, and immediately there was assumptions of what my religion was. And then I would have to go, no, actually, I'm Hindu. And then be like, a whole massive conversation about, well, how can you be Hindu if you're from Bangladesh? You must be Indian. So there was a period of time where I actually went and introduced myself as Indian, because then I wouldn't have to have the whole conversation about my religion and why I was drinking, for example, or why I wasn't eating beef and things like that. So I think there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen, which will then help us in our professional lives as well to accept each other and understand that although we are different, we are the same. As Kat said, we are all siblings. I think there is unconscious assumptions of people's capabilities. Yes, as Kat said, you know, it's assumed that you're going to be good at certain things and certain, you know, you're going to be more techie, or you're going to be, and even myself, I find it really hard to not do it. You know, and I had a conversation recently with somebody in my team, and I had to be really careful to not come across as making the assumption that because they were from an East Asian background, that they may enjoy coding, or they may enjoy the more techie stuff in my team. And I really had to kind of go, look, I'm not making any assumptions here, but I need this done. And I know that you're looking at a change, you know, what do you think? But I'm glad that I had the awkward conversation, so that they're aware that I'm aware that this could be seen as me being biased based on your appearances without knowing what your capabilities are. And I think those awkward conversations are really important to have, because once we start having them, we can all be more open and honest about actually what we are thinking, what we are feeling, and entertain more dialogues, which will then start bringing us together. So we've talked a lot about storytelling, which will help people understand our backgrounds. You know, you might start to understand that actually I'm a minority of a minority of a minority is how I explain myself. So, you know, I have grown up with parents who have always felt like they don't have a say. So, and I'm quite a vocal person, as you all know, and I was battling with that my entire life. Now, if you didn't know my story, you wouldn't understand why I am so vocal, why I can be quite in your face when I need to be. Once you understand my story, you may then go, okay, I understand. She's had to speak up a lot. So storytelling is one side, but I think the other thing is then putting yourself in the uncomfortable position of going, I don't know this. And I need your help in navigating this. And actually, maybe we should navigate it together and start to have those conversations, as we are with All In, as we are as MEFA, starting to understand actually how do we support each other? What is it that you need? What is it that I need? And how can we, you know, push everyone up that ladder that we all end up going up and then down and up and down? How do we actually just keep moving up?
Amazing, I love that. And I think you've acknowledged something really important there with the biases, that we're guilty of it as well, of kind of having our own biases, and it's one of those things that maybe every time someone enters a room, you just lay all your biases on the table and just kind of get them over and done with, just so they're all kind of acknowledged and we can move forward from there. I think following on from kind of what we've talked about already, we've obviously seen a huge mobilization, not just of the ad industry, the whole world, to be honest, in terms of a kind of a diversity and inclusion drive in the tragic events of the murder of George Floyd last year. And obviously, one of the things that came out of that, one of the big things that came out of it, and that we saw huge kind of allyship as well as a huge show of unity by the Black community, but also everyone that was supporting them, was the kind of the rise or the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. It should, obviously, we never ever want a trigger for anything like that to happen again, but do we feel that there is enough unity and solidarity within the Asian community? Do you think that we could mobilize and kind of move forward if we need to? Raveline, I'm going to come to you first on this, because I know you've got a super interesting take from something we discussed earlier in the week, and I'd love to hear that before I come to you, Rat.
Yeah, and I hope I do it justice now. But I've been thinking a little bit about this, and I think, you know, Shez made a really good point earlier around is it that we just are not able to come together, and that's why we don't have the one voice? And I was kind of thinking about, is there anything else there? And I wonder how much of it is also around, you know, the point around model minority can be really problematic, because it can lull you into thinking, oh, be the good citizen, actually, don't make a noise and don't be too out there and no one will notice you. And I was thinking back to actually the community that I did grow up in. A big thing would be around, you know, let's try and fit in. Actually, we don't want to stick out. And so it wasn't just that there wasn't a unity on voice, but nobody wanted to make a big deal out of anything and almost pretend like there was no difference in the way that people were being treated. And as a result, I don't really remember a lot of racism from when I was growing up. But I think it's because this is so drummed. Now I look back and think maybe it was just so drummed into us to look past it and just try and comply, so that you don't look different, that we're not sure that there is something to speak out about. You know, we have this report, and we talk about the triggers that perhaps have kicked off some of the other movements and the unity that we've seen, and we haven't had that. And so maybe it's just harder to identify that something actually is going on. And for me personally, you know, I was looking back on my career, and I know Rak and I have talked about this over the years as well, about how I have adapted to white cultural standards and have supported actually the status quo, and thinking that that was solidarity in a way. And then coming across some of the concepts of what I now know to be internalized racism, which is almost where you are conforming to standards of the dominant culture, and sometimes at the expense of your own. And it never really occurred to me until I started to look back, and almost sometimes feel a little bit embarrassed in how I was in situations, even with other South Asian people. It was just, there was this whole thing about covering. You know, I wouldn't talk at work about all the things that I would do at home, you know, and sometimes it felt like I had a different life at home than I had in the workplace. And it kind of felt inauthentic at times, where you're being pushed in the workplace to, you know, be your authentic self. And if you're leading, be an authentic leader. Well, that's actually really hard to do if you're having to cover up some really important parts of your life. And it's you know, it might seem like a small thing to anyone else, but I never ever wear my hair down. I've never done it. I've never gone into work and had my hair down. My hair's like down to my bum. And most people that have worked with me for over 10 years think I have short hair. And they're like, oh, why don't you let your hair down? And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I'm worried that identifies me as different, or am I embarrassed of it? And, you know, there's all these questions that continually come up for me. I don't have the answer to them all, by the way. But then I'm like, God, am I racist against myself? Like, what is going on? But there's so much uncovering to do. And this notion of covering, which has also been something that's come about to me in the last kind of couple of years. We've done a lot of work actually on that at Microsoft and understanding it. You know, it's just all, there's just so much in there. I think someone else talked about the whole complexity and having to unlearn things. And I think that's the stage that I'm at, which is, what are the things that I need to unlearn, and what are the things I want to keep actually, and how do I show some of the solidarity that I want to see? So for instance, in the past, in my early career, if I saw someone else who was Punjabi like me in the team, I wouldn't want to look as if I was giving them extra attention, or like, you know, going out of my way to make a connection with them that I wouldn't have with anyone else. I'm not sure why I thought that would have been a bad thing now, looking back. And I don't do that now. In fact, I kind of go out of my way to say, hey, you know, it was Vaisakhi last month. What did you do? Did you do something virtually, or you didn't? And, you know, whereas I wouldn't have done that, like probably even 5 years ago, I would have avoided a situation like that. And in fact, now I want to mentor people who are like me, that might be also looking for a pathway into our industry. But again, I think I would have felt funny about that a few years back, thinking, oh, I don't want anyone to think that I'm, you know, showing more connection to someone who's like me. And that took a bit of unlearning and getting over as well.
Amazing. I think again, there's a lot of truths in there which kind of ring very true to me as well. And I feel some of the ways that I've acted throughout my kind of career. Continuing with this theme, Rak, I'm going to ask you a slightly challenging question, I think, and I think we've all, since the All-In survey results came out, we've kind of sat together with the Advertising Association to talk about what we can kind of do going forward. Is there, envy is not the right word, but I'm going to use the word envy. Is there slight envy over kind of Black Lives Matter? Do we need something in the industry for Asians, and how kind of we kind of move forward and mobilize together and support each other?
Do you know what, Mihir? I hear what you're saying on the envy side, but I think that's the wrong word and the wrong way we should look at it. You know, all boats need to rise, and some of the boats have been a bit further below the waterline that we all need to be at. And I think, you know, what's happened over the last year, in particular supporting the Black community in our industry and across the world, as you rightly pointed out, is the right thing to do, for sure. Because key is that we all get to the same watermark, and then we all rise up. Right, that is without shadow of a doubt the priority. I would say. You know, we've talked there about Do we come together as a group? Do we, you know, absolutely, that's exactly what we should be doing. Because I think that is the only way you can then make the significant changes that we need going forward. There's a few things I just want to sort of share. Firstly, Rav, just as you, very formal that, wasn't it? Just to explain there, I think, you know, and I'm certain everyone on this panel can relate to it. You know, that covering you do, you know, and if I talk from my own perspective, you know, being my true self, I was only able to do that when I got in a senior role where I realized that I could do that. You know, prior to that, I've had to have coaching, counseling, all that sort of stuff because of the different shades of rack. And you'll have different shades of subs and you'll have different shades of Rav and so on and so forth. I remember one thing that happened when my youngest, who's now 15 and bigger than me and a proper teenager, when he was about 3 or 4 and I was on a call, I was at Microsoft working alongside Rav, and I was on a call and I came off the call and my son, the 3-year-old son, said, "Daddy, what voice was that?" And I was using a different voice. I had a different work voice, right? And all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, that really related to me, Rav, what you were talking to, and I'm sure many people on the call as well. But going back to you know, how the boat should rise, I think, you know, organizations like MEFA and what Naren's done and everyone that's there, you know, we do need to unite. We do need to sort of push it, because what came out in the survey, it's not a surprise, is it? It's not a surprise at all, right? I think that's you know, shows you absolutely nailed it in terms of your sort of response there. But there is, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. At Spotify, and look, at Spotify, we are by no means perfect. We've got loads of work to do, and you know, there's a way we look at diversity, inclusion, and belonging. You know, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is, you know, get on the dance floor with everyone. And belonging is they're playing your tune, they're playing your banger. That's making you put your hands in the air, right? And I think, you know, what the industry has done in an okay way is we're inviting everyone for sure. But then it's the inclusion, and particularly the belonging piece, that I think, you know, needs so much more focus. And that's why 27%, you know, of those that were Asian said, "I'm going to leave the industry." And that's why 28% said the same, that were black, you know, in terms of leaving the industry and so on. And I think that you know, we can't just fill quotas. We've got to make our work environments places where, you know, there is that real sense of belonging. And it, you know, and I can see progress. I can definitely see progress on that front. And you know, like I say, I've said it a few times, I think it's really important that all boats rise at the same time here, and you know, and we make the changes that are needed.
Absolutely, thank you very much for that. We've kind of talked about kind of intercultural differences, and Rack began touching on kind of the industry and how the industry needs to support us. And I want to go on to some of the industry's cultural traits that may not be accommodating to Asian community. Now, the really obvious one here is drinking. Drinking is a huge part of our industry, drinking and lunching, and many kind of Asians have dietary requirements as well, so it's not just alcohol based. How problematic is this? Shez, I'm going to come to you first because you, as you said, you are Muslim, and drinking is prohibited in Muslim culture. So how has it been working in the industry? And I know that you've worked sales side as well, working that side where drinking is such a big, it's almost an expectation, if I'm completely honest. How's it been managing your faith alongside something that is part and parcel of our industry?
Thanks, Mir. I mean, really, really easy question to answer, right? Let's I'm going to tackle it from a slightly different angle. So I think first and foremost, again, you know, I think we're taking some really, really positive steps in the industry to appreciate diversity, but that needs to ramp up, right? So, for example, I've started to see the curiosity come through a lot more over the last few years, as some organizations have embraced Ramadan or Diwali or Vaisakhi, but that curiosity needs to be fed. It really feels like a lot of the efforts that I put together are really, really sort of like last minute and a little bit of an afterthought, but it's a nice starting place. Yeah, it's great that organizations thinking about it, and I think that's really supportive. And if we take that into, say, team building or client entertainment and that sort of stuff, I think a lot of what we do is still centered around drinking, right? But I've personally witnessed more activities where drinking is either not an option or not the main event. Yeah, not an option. The main one that comes to mind are things like axe throwing, right? Or you know, whatever, like go-kart, you know. So there are these other things. You know, we're trying to be playful with it. We're trying to work out ways in which we can be a little bit more inclusive. So at Critio, for example, we've done sports days, we've put on breakfasts, and of course, in this virtual world, we have done things like yoga and cooking and quizzes, like everyone else. Like everyone else, we're a bit sick of quizzes, right? But we've done it. So, and yes, of course, we've also done wine tasting, and on occasion, there's been the option to maybe try and do something for the non-drinkers. Usually with wine tasting, what it is you send out more chocolates, or you send out some juices, or you give out an allowance to expense, and you're kind of just drinking your schlur or equivalent along with the wine tasting thing, right? But it's okay. Like, at least there is an effort that is being made. But I think that the thing is that we need to allow people to be themselves, right? So I, for one, have not always been open. I know you're talking about drinking, but you know, for me, the big thing is Ramadan, right? So coming to the office and telling, I don't tell people usually when I'm fasting, and that's because, you know, I don't want the questions about, oh right, okay, so you know you can't drink water, or like it's you know, people, I feel like that education needs to be done. We need to invest a little bit more for these conversations to people just have an understanding, right? What Vaisakhi is, what Diwali is, what Ramadan is, and then the drinking component in particular. To answer your question, really, it really does still feel like there is a group of individuals in the industry that associate not being able to drink with not being able to do the job. And I can tell you that's really not the case, right? So if I add to that, I find it really funny that we can accommodate dry January with ease, but with individuals who have chosen not to drink, you know, they get a bit of stick. So and also, if you look like me and you don't drink, then that's pretty much all we're talking about all night long. So the drinking component in itself needs to be reviewed. Like, there needs to be like a total review in there, right? In terms of what does that mean within the industry, and do we really care about it, and what the objective is of that role? I mean, if we're going out and you're having a pint and I'm having some water or I'm having something else, does it really matter as long as the job gets done? So I think that's a separate point, but it needs to be viewed in general. It's not just for South Asians. I think that's a thing in itself. So I think we're making some great steps, but a lot more needs to be done here. To make people feel comfortable to be themselves and bring themselves to the office.
Thank you so much for that. Vino, I know you've been sitting really patiently here, and I know you've got some thoughts on this, and be really interested to hear kind of your thoughts on drinking culture and around Asians, and particularly, I know you said at the start of the panel that you had your parents met in a very modern way, and they lived a very modern, in inverted commas, lifestyle for Asian culture. But sometimes for Asian women at home, they may not be allowed to be, not allowed, maybe frowned upon if they're seen with a pint and things like that. But in the industries, that's what's kind of the balance of being yourself in the industry and being a different person outside of it?
I mean, I found it really interesting to hear everyone's stories, and it really has just highlighted to me something I probably felt most of my life. I don't know if it's because I'm Sri Lankan. I don't know if it's because my parents have always been quite progressive. I don't know if it's just our family, but my parents always had a drink before dinner at home. We were always encouraged to drink at home. My dad always thought, look, I'd rather you learn how to do this stuff here so you don't do it behind my back. We always had massive parties every Saturday night, and everyone was always really trolleyed. And I guess being Sri Lankan, there is an element of, you know, we like to get on it, really, which seems to be a bit of a phrase in our family. But also, I trained as a journalist, and I remember my first job 25 years ago, working for a trade paper at EMAP. You know, all of our editorial meetings were in the pub. So if you didn't drink, and I can't imagine, had I been Shez, I think it would have held me back, because it was normal to go to the pub and have a pint. luckily I had learned at the age of 16 to like drink a pint in a oneer, so I was always fine. I still do it. And, you know, every time we went to press, every Thursday, we'd go to the pub after work, every night, pub, like business. My first probably 5 or 6 years of my career, the impression I got was that business is done down the pub. And my dad worked in publishing as well. And so I remember seeing him, you know, like talking about that. And he would go to the pub every Friday night. It was a ritual. So for me, it was like I was always pretty okay with it. I think the times where I've seen my Asian colleagues or Muslim colleagues or colleagues who have issues with drinking definitely feel like they're being held back in some way. And I think there have been times in my own career where perhaps it has been a surprise that I have suggested that we all go to the Oval and watch the T20 cricket and get really smashed. I don't think that's always the expected response from an Asian woman. But I'd also think that part of that is generational, because now I'm sort of midlife. I see lots of younger Asian people just going out, and all they seem to talk about is shots. So I'm assuming that they do that at work as well. You know, shots is a culture apparently. I mean, I think it's the most hideous way to drink ever. But I don't know. I feel like perhaps I am a result of a perfect storm in terms of generation, culture, background, family, friends, profession. That drinking has definitely not been a barrier for me. There have been plenty of others, but drinking has been fine. And also my name is Vino, so I was born to drink. But yeah, that hasn't been a barrier for me, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks very much. I love the little reference to your name there. Ravleen's posted something really interesting in the chat, actually, and it's something that actually maybe the whole, because of COVID and people working from home, maybe that will become a thing of the past, and people have more of a reason to kind of say no to these things and work from home. Well, hopefully that's kind of the cultural change. I want to, we're coming towards the end of the time, and I want to finish really kind of quickly on one of the good things that came out of the Orland survey. Well, it could be seen as a good thing that came out of the Orland survey was that actually at younger age groups, Asian representation was actually over-represented versus kind of national average, which to me is really reassuring. So I remember I joined the industry 8 years ago, so I've been in the industry a lot less time than the rest of my fellow panelists. But I remember joining and thinking there's hardly anyone my age or anyone that looked like me, but it seems that is turning a corner. Ships, I know you've done some work with some schools and colleges, I think it is. Do you think that media is now becoming a more viable and accepted career? I know, again, when I joined, I had some funny looks or comments from family and family friends about, why are you joining the media industry? What does that mean? Why aren't you becoming an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, or blah, blah, blah? Do you think that tide is beginning to change for the better?
I'm hoping so, because we are seeing more and more talent coming in. I don't know whether or not that is consciously being done as well. I think there's a question mark around that as to whether or not there has been more focus from agencies on diversity, which is why they were coming in. So is it that there's become more awareness, or is it that more jobs are being offered? I think there's one question there that needs to be asked. Because when I've been doing the talks that I've been doing and the conversations I've been having, I don't see that there is much awareness of actually what a job in marketing could look like. You know, I went, I told the MEFA Town Hall crew yesterday that I went to a school and I was talking to them about my career, and you could see their face was just like this. It wasn't until I talked about money that everyone just went, what? And they realized that actually that there is money to be made, and that we then started talking about the different types of roles that you could have, and you don't have to have had a marketing degree. I don't have a marketing degree to be working in marketing, and actually we do need data scientists, and we need language, and we need all that sort of stuff. So I think there is some awareness, but there definitely needs to be more and more awareness, and there's a question mark as to whether or not the diversity we're seeing it is because agencies are making it a point, which will mean that which will mean that there has that the constructs are changing, which is a good thing. But yeah, I still think there's a lot of outreach that needs to be done to educate. But then, as Rak was saying, it's one good thing to bring in the talent, but when they are here, we definitely need to make sure that they feel like they belong here. And that's my biggest concern, is actually the inclusivity piece of it. Because we're 27% want to leave. So even though they're here, they want to jump off the boat quite quickly. And I think that's the biggest challenge we've got, is bringing them and then helping them stay.
Absolutely, and that's why the work that we're doing as MEFA is super important, that we kind of break down these barriers and make it a better industry for every minority to kind of work in going forward. I think we are just about out of time. I want to thank all of my amazing panelists. I mean, we could have talked for another hour. I didn't get to hear as many thoughts on each question as I would have liked to, but time was not on our side. So massive thank you, Shez, Rak, Ravleen, Vino, Kat, and Shups. Really, really enjoyed that. For those of you in attendance, thank you for attending. You'll be pleased to know that Liam will be back on next month. The theme will probably be announced in a few weeks' time. But yeah, massive thank you. If you have anything that you want to kind of reach out to us about, or as I said at the start, if there's anything that kind of was concerning or you want to speak to someone about, then the NABS helpline is in the chat. But massive thank you to you all, and I will see you soon.